Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about our friend, the Nintendo DS. Yes, really, that's what we're doing. And just to get this out of the way, no, this is not the handheld recap series. No, this is not that official part of the series or anything like that. I've just decided, hey, you know what it is? It's the 20th anniversary of the Nintendo DS. Yes, 20 years ago, this thing came out, and I thought it would just be kind of fun to do a little reminiscing, talk all about it, little history lesson, little personal story, go over a few of the games, really just sit down and go down, memory lane, give you some nostalgia berries. That's really all we're doing here today. So before we do that, though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all my social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, my Spreadshirt, travel channel. Appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now, first there's going to be a couple of little actually type of people here, and I don't blame you. So this video, if you're watching this today, it came out, is November 20th, 2024, and the system launched on November 21st, 2004. So technically, the birthday is tomorrow. So Adam, what'd you do? Did you screw it up? Did you release the video early? No, because I'm sitting here acknowledging the problem. The reason for that is there's a totally separate video coming out tomorrow, and the day after that is another video, so it's just, this was the only way it was going to work. So think of it this way. I'm doing a video on the DS so that you have time to remember its birthday, so you don't go like, what? That totally blindsided me. I didn't see that one coming. You can go out and get a cake, some birthday candles, whatever you want, however you want to celebrate it. I'm basically just saying, look, it's an excuse. I need to talk about it, but I can't do it tomorrow. So we're gonna be talking about it today. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the Nintendo DS. Yeah, it's 20 years old. How does that make you feel, bro? It makes me feel really old. So basically, I'm not going to do like an extensive history of the system, but here's basically all we really have to say on it. So, believe it or not, this system actually launched first in the United States. I was a little surprised by that. I figured it came out in Japan first. It did not. It came out in the US first. It came out in Japan like a month later, in December of 2004. And I was a very interesting age when that happened, because I was basically like 16, 17, something like that. I think 17. And at that age, you're in this weird transition phase of your life, where you're like, look, I'm still technically a kid, but I have to kind of like prepare to be an adult soon. So it's like, I'm in my junior year of high school, they're prepping you for like, oh, college is coming, and that's where you become an adult. You have to join the workforce and blah, 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 blah. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate. When you reach that age, you still like a lot of the stuff that you liked when you were a kid, but you kind of go through this, oh, no, I'm an adult now phase. I wouldn't like any Nintendos. That's weird. So for me, it launched at a very strange age, where I was kind of pretending to not be interested in it, but I was totally interested in it. But you have to understand, too, that I grew up throughout the 90s, right? So, like, for me, handheld Nintendo was always the Game Boy line. With the exception of the Virtual Boy, which technically is part of that line. I didn't have that. But, I had all the others, and it's just the idea that, like, Nintendo's going to make a handheld that's not a Game Boy? What's that all about? Okay, it's got 2 screens? What do I need that for? What's going on? It was just like that level of confusion, also coming out of that particular age in my case. It just was like a storm of weird. So as a result, I actually didn't get the DS right away. I think it actually had been out for like well over a year before I got one. I think I got one maybe even after I got out of high school. I think I might have got one like that summer of like 2005. That's when I graduated high school. I think that might be when I got mine. I think I bought a used one from GameStop, like, that type of deal. And it wasn't like some crazy experience. If I remember correctly, I went in there not really that interested in getting it, except for one game, which we'll get to. And, some of my friends were saying, oh, it's not bad, I kind of like it, because we're all the same age going through the exact same thing. So I didn't have anybody in my ear being like, dude, the DS is killer. So, but the system itself, we talk a little bit about that. Like I said, it comes out, obviously, in 2004, November 21st, and it ends up being a huge success. Like, huge success. At this point in time, at the time of this recording, it is the second highest-selling video game platform of all time, only losing out to the PlayStation 2. It might soon be beaten by the Nintendo Switch. Its own, weird cousin might actually replace it, but, I mean, this is the second highest selling video game platform of all time, again, at the time of this recording. And that's just, like, you can't knock that success. That was a huge hit. But I do, like I said, it was weird at the time. Because it really was like, why is Nintendo not doing a Game Boy? What are they changing here? Why do we need two screens? What is this all about? And, you know, regardless of what you think Nintendo, they were obviously right. It was a huge hit, and it was a very good system, and I do recommend that you guys go out and scope it out and check it out if you just don't have one. They're also super easy to get these days. But getting ahead of ourselves. So yeah, no, I ended up getting the system with the one game that I really kind of wanted. I'm, you know, kind of closet protecting, like, oh, yeah, it's okay to play a video game when nobody's around. They can't see me playing it. They won't know. You know, like, it's a weird age, as I'm sure a lot of you guys remember. But yeah, the system ends up being a big success. This is the initial launch model. Well, okay, I'm not going to say this is a launch unit specifically because I didn't buy it at launch, but it's the type of design Nintendo had initially on the DS. I remember thinking that it was, you know, nice. That it was just cool. Like, I liked the look of it. I liked the feel of it. And one thing you got to remember is I am a child of the 90s, so I, you know, grew up on your kind of monochrome Game Boy screens or your overly bright but not very detailed Game Gear screens, etc. So I actually remember that one of the reasons I was interested in this, you know, because there was one game, which again we'll get to, but there was another motive for me when I was picking this up, which was, well, you know what? I have all these Game Boy games from when I was a kid. You know, the screen on that sucks, but I've seen the screen on this thing. It's much better. Oh, it's got a Game Boy slot? I'll bet it'll work, you know? It'll just be the best way to play my Game Boy games. Which actually legitimately was a thought. It was because the screen was so much nicer than the stuff we had grown up on, even though the screen on this particular model, by modern standards, and even compared to other models of the DS, is not a good screen. But still, I was like, that's going to be a huge improvement. So I partially justified it to myself, thinking, you know, I'll play all my Game Boy games on it. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you are already screaming at your keyboards, it doesn't play Game Boy games. It plays Game Boy Advance games, but it doesn't play original Game Boy or Game Boy Color games. So that slot on the bottom, and that would actually be removed from later iterations of the DS. I think it was really just the initial version that had that. GBA games look nice on it, but, you know, objectively, if you wanted to play them, it would probably be better to use, like, these days, like, you know, something like the GameCube. You can do that too. Like, there was better ways to do it, but I'm just giving you my mentality as it was at the time. Anywho. So that partially justified it, and then I was wrong, so I had to rely on the DS library. But yeah, so that was my initial go-to with that. And of course, we were seeing, you know, the rise of the PSP and Sony's competition with that, etc. But yeah, it was cool. It was cool. Now, like I said, the system was a huge hit. And there was a bunch of different models from it. This is the DSi. I only got this like a year ago. Like my buddy, shout out to my buddy Sunshine. He actually buys these things, refurbishes them, and then once he's done with them, he doesn't really keep them. So he's like, here you go, you can have one. So he's just got tons of these. Now the reason for that is, like I said, second highest selling system ever, or platform ever. So they're super easy and cheap to get, especially in Japan. They're just littered in junk bins. And he's the type of dude who grabs a bunch of units, finds all the good parts, consolidates them, and makes working ones. So that's what you have here. There were obviously other models. There was also the DS Lite, which I don't have, but I have shown you in the past. And the DS, you know, model, like the concept of it, was a super big success for Nintendo. I mean, it went on to create their next successor, which was the 3DS, which I do have, but it's not out here because it's not part of this system. Things like the new 3DS, you know, the 3DS XL, that whole line. Like, point is, Nintendo got into like insanity with this. Even the concept of two screens survived into their console area for a little bit with the Wii U. And how Nintendo never released like a USB dongle for the Wii U that allows you to play original DS games on it is just like, what? That was just a freebie you could have done, but they didn't do it for whatever reason. But yeah, cool system. And eventually I kind of got used to the whole concept of two screens and like how, you know, obviously it had a touch screen, which was, you have to remember, at the time that I grew up in, when this thing came out, when we first saw this idea of a touch screen, it was like, you can do that now? Like, touchscreens were a pretty rare concept at the time. And if you don't believe me, give an original Game Boy or a Game Boy Color to like a little kid right now and watch as they just poke at the screen and they don't understand why it's not doing anything. It's but anyway, so yeah, that was that. Now, I'll go over a couple of the games here because that's roughly the history of it. It was a big success, and now, you know, it's kind of evolved itself and we're in the Switch era. But we'll go over some of the games, okay? So this is not all my games. I want to get that out of the way. So if you're like, where's X, Y, and Z game that I love? Dude, it's just a few games I put out here just to talk about because I have a little bit of a story on each one. That's really all it is. This is like, it's not even half the ones I own. You know, and that said, I'm also not a huge handheld guy, so like my time with it was relatively limited, all things considered. So we'll go over some of the ones. The first one up here I've got is Resident Evil Deadly Silence. This is an iteration of Resident Evil I don't hear a whole lot of people talk about, probably because it's exclusive to this system. But effectively, and you have to forgive me because I have not played this really since I got it. I actually remember buying this at a Game Crazy. Who's old enough to remember that? It was Hollywood Video, which you have to remember that first. Their attempt, which was a Blockbuster competitor. Hollywood Video was a Blockbuster competitor, okay? And their attempt to create a GameStop competitor was called Game Crazy. And this whole concept only survived for a couple of years. I remember buying this from them because I kind of like around 2005, 2006, I got really into survival horror games. And I've told that story before because my late mother, she never had an issue with what games I was playing, but she didn't really like this idea of survival horror games. So I think that's probably why I started getting more of them. So like I would go over there and just kind of buy them, you know, because I had a beard when I was 16, so the M for mature thing, people just ignored that. Like, yeah, he can buy games. He's clearly an adult. Definitely, yes. And so I would pick up games like this. And I remember, and I've told this story in the past, where some of those games I was afraid that when I left for college, my mom would maybe get rid of. She never did anything like that, but that was just kind of like a phobia in my mind. And I hid them in like an area of my room, and they were not discovered until last year or so. I had a fire at my house, my late mother's house in 2022. And when that happened, eventually, like, there was a phase where we couldn't touch the contents of the house and whatever. And finally, when we were allowed to do that before they start doing the demolition stuff, I was allowed to kind of dig through. And one of the things that had been unearthed was this cardboard box I had hidden away, forgot all about for the better part of 20 years. And inside was, like, horror games I had bought that were insane. Like, I had bought Rule of Rose, I had bought Kuon, and they were just sitting there, and I'd forgotten all about it. This was part of that era, but because it was a handheld, I think I brought it with me down here, and I had just, you know, forgotten all about it. But yeah, it's basically, I mean, that's a long deviating story, but basically, this is a remake of Resident Evil 1 with new features and stuff like that. I remember liking it, but my general consensus on it was I remember liking it more on the PlayStation and playing it on a television. Because that's generally how I've gone. Like, portable games to me are fun, but they have to be a very particular type of game. And if it's not that type of game, I typically prefer playing stuff on a television. That's just my mentality. But all the same, that's why I have that. Sonic Classics Collection, which was really just the Sega Genesis era games. I really only got this because at the time, playing that stuff on the go, unless you had the Nomad and the carts and everything, was just not feasible. But this was better because, of course, not only did the screens function better, but it also had rechargeable batteries, which I cannot stress enough to the younger kids, was not a thing when we were growing up. They had normal, like, Duracell batteries you had to pop in there, AA's, etc. This had a built-in battery you could just recharge with a cable. This was like mind-breaking technology at the time. So the idea that I could play some of my favorite Sega Genesis games ever on this thing, on a better screen, portably, and have better battery life, etc., that was a must-go-to. Sonic and Sega AllStars Racing. I got this. I did like this game. I actually love it for the Xbox 360. This version I really only got because Ryo Hazuki is in it. I'm a big Shenmue fan, obviously. I like this version of the game just fine, but every time I play it, or have played it, I should say, I just think I'd rather be playing the Xbox 360 version, but it's still a good kart racing game. Speaking of kart racers, though, probably my second favorite game on the system, and one that I probably spent the most time with, really, was Mario Kart DS. This is, to me, kind of the perfect DS experience, because it not only is a game exclusive to the system, it really encapsulates exactly why Nintendo was always successful with handhelds, which is they gave you a good portable experience that you can pick up, put down, jump in, jump out type of game that wasn't overly complex, simplistic in its nature, delivered on a fun quality experience, looked very nice, but was not too complex. You know what I'm trying to say? There was like this perfect balance. This is exactly the kind of game the DS was made for. And to me is probably the one that I've had the most fun with on that system. Though this wasn't actually the reason I got the DS, as far as like that one title I keep talking about. But yeah, got that. That's great. New Super Mario Bros. U, or not U, that tells you something. A little Freudian slip. I like this game a lot. I prefer the Wii U version, which granted is essentially a different game, but like this whole idea of kind of remaking the 2D Mario Brothers games into 3D elements and everything is a lot of fun. This game is good. I just preferred when they redid it again effectively for the Wii U, and that's for the same reason. If I can play this type of game on a television, I'll do it. Good game, just has a better version out there. But here we go. This is the game that made me really get into this. Super Mario 64 DS. This one is, of course, effectively an upgraded, shall we call it a definitive edition of Super Mario 64 for originally for the N64. Now, this was, I don't remember if this was a launch title. I think it was. But again, because I didn't buy this thing at launch, keep in mind. So when I heard about this, I was like, that's awesome. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and they've added a whole bunch of new content, new characters and everything. This is key to this story, why I would get so excited about this. Remember, I grew up in the mid-90s, so the N64 was a big deal when I was just the right age for it. And I grew up when, I was the last generation to grow up without the internet. So no smartphones, no Google, like no way to like go home and verify anybody's story. So all you had to rely on for information like this was video game magazines and frankly the school ground, the rumor mill, as it were. And so like I remember going to school and like you'd be, you know, all of us are playing N64, we're talking about it, and we're like, dude, I heard, you know, my cousin, he works at Nintendo, right? And he told me that you can actually unlock Luigi in Super Mario 64. But it's really hard. Like you have to beat the whole game, get all the stars in like an hour. Like, people would just make stuff up, because that's obviously not true. But, like, people would make this stuff up, and then you'd be like, this one guy's like, no, look, dude, I can prove it. And then, because, like, you know how if you technically beat that game, you meet, like, Yoshi for a second at the very end of the game? So people would have, like, a photo they found of that somewhere, and they'd be like, look, he's in the game, we got to figure out how to do it. Like, not understanding that it's not, like, some way to just make him playable in the whole game, etc. That was just what it was like to be a kid at that time, because there was a certain naivete to the fact that you just didn't have a whole lot of access to information. But rather than it being dangerous that you didn't have a lot of information, it was just kind of fun because we're just talking about video games here. But anyway, so when this was released, and they're like, oh yeah, Luigi's going to be playable, Yoshi's going to be playable, and also we're throwing Wario in it just because why not? It was like, boom! Like, that childhood rumor mill finally came into reality. So I remember sinking a lot of time actually playing this, because it was a game I was obviously very familiar with, and playing a new updated version was very, very nice to me. But I do, in all fairness, I do recall sitting there being like, it would have been so much better to play this on a television. I don't know if this is true, it probably isn't, but here we go, rumor mill stuff, right? I do kind of recall that this is kind of what ended up happening with the 64DD version of Super Mario 64. For those who don't know, the 64DD was an attachment for the N64 that was meant to be kind of like a Sega CD. It was only released in Japan, comically limited numbers, but it would have allowed bigger versions of the games, or even what we would now think of as DLC, where it kind of is compatible with the cartridges. For years, there were basically rumors that they were going to do a Super Mario 64 expansion that would have been compatible with the original game, and then it would have had all these extra characters and all this extra content, etc. Supposedly that actually was in development. I'm wondering if those assets and all that was just kind of thrown over to the DS. I don't actually know that to be the sequence of events, but it wouldn't exactly shock me. And so the last thing I want to show you here real quick is the Easy Flash Parallel. I did a video on this. It's for, I'm sure this will ring a lot of bells out there. Like the R4 card, this is just a flash card you can put in the DS, you put an SD card in there, and then you can just load like all the original like DS ROMs on it and play like whatever you want. And I know what you're asking, where's all the Pokemon? I gotta be honest, I was never a Pokemon guy. So yes, naturally I don't have that stuff, but that doesn't matter. We all get to enjoy the games our own way. So where I will leave you is the DS, 20 years old, go out and enjoy it. Still readily accessible system, super easy to get one, very, very cheap, large library of games, and actually very easy methods to play those games if you just want to experience those adventures. So I'm curious, who out there has a DS? I'm sure a lot of you do. Who's going to play it today, or tomorrow, probably more accurately at the time this video is released? And just, you know, what stories do you have? I want to know, because it is fun to kind of just go back and say like, yeah, DS is 20. That's cool. Makes me really old, but man, is that cool. So I must have been 17, obviously. Yeah, I think that's what I said before. So that would track. Okay, now, because I'm 37 at the moment. Now, with that, I want to give a huge shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Please do me a favor. like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and then check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, my Spreadshirt, travel channel. I appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all later.